Good, whatever time it is when you're watching this, and welcome to another day of Bhagavad Gita Sadhana, a long-term study of what it means to become and be yourself in the deepest, truest sense of the word. Thanks so much for joining, and thanks for the questions. We have a third and final question of yours that came to my email. So we're going to address it today. And this is huge. This is actually one of the big thrusts of not only yoga, but many spiritual traditions. So the question is, you mentioned the challenge of discerning between acting from ego and acting from a higher perspective or from self. Any guidelines on making that distinction? We are so good at fooling ourselves. Yes, we are. What an insightful query. As we go through this program together, I actually feel like every one of the contemplations we do is kind of designed to get us to that place where we're able to figure out what's our higher self and what's our ego, our limited self, we could say. When we say higher and lower, there's a tendency perhaps to judge one is better than the other. And really, according to Gita, nothing is necessarily better than anything else. It's just different. So we could call it our expanded self and our contracted or limited self. Let's do that. And I know in previous videos I've also given some wise advice as to how to distinguish which one is talking, the expansive or the limited. So I'm not going to review that here so much because we can talk about techniques for managing, I like to call them symptoms, as opposed to techniques for getting to the root. And this question here really, to me, brings up kind of the root of the problem that we need to address. And first of all, for me, knowing that this question needs to be asked actually makes me sad. Not that the question itself or the questioner has done anything wrong. It's just that the fact that we, as functioning adult human beings, have to ask this question: how do I know when I'm listening to my lower, more contracted self or my more expansive self? That makes me sad, because if we want to become full human beings in life, shouldn't that be like something we're educated about from the very beginning? I mean, we're taught so many things from when we're young: how to be nice, how to fit in, how to conform to expected roles. And then, like I always wanted to learn how to tinker with cars, but I couldn't because I was a girl. But learning how to tinker with cars, at least in this society, is a pretty necessary skill. I mean, social media, we've got to learn how to do that, right? But these are all things that change, like social media. I know people that were born into it are like, it's always been around. No, it hasn't. And it's not going to be around. And then the next thing's going to come up. And then that generation is going to be like, you used to do what? What was the tweeter or something like that? Why aren't we learning this most valuable skill? And even if we're not taught it explicitly, why have we gotten to the point where we have to learn some trick or technique to access our true self? So that, for me, is sad. So let's talk about less the technique, because there are so many techniques out there, and you need to find the one that works best for you. Okay. And they'll work better at different times of day and on different days. So there's that as well. If we look at the symbolism of the Gita, we talked about Dhritarashtra, the blind king. We've talked about him for a couple days, representing the ego. And Krishna, Arjun's best friend, represents the expansive, true self. Hi, buddy. The ego is posed as, it can be helpful. See, when The Pandavas, when Arjuna and his brothers were young, the ego actually helped them, protected them from the world, helped them realize their place, their duty, their destiny. Their relationship with ego in the form of their blind uncle was good and supportive. And then it soured over time, which actually can happen to us. We become locked in to certain expectations about our ego, and then things shift. And instead of the ego, represented by Dhritarashtra in the story, transforming, the transformation would have been to step aside and let those beings representing the true self take over the kingdom. The kingdom represents our life, our body, our mind. And the ego's job when we're young, is to keep us as individual embodied beings healthy and happy on all levels. But the way that happens changes as we get older. Unfortunately, we kind of cling to the old ego roles, and that's what causes a problem. We don't learn how to set it aside so that the deepest values of ourselves, and the Pandavas represent the 5 key virtues of ourselves, which is beauty, intelligence, the ability to manifest our destiny, love, and truth. Okay? The ego won't step aside for that. And that's where the problem comes in. So the ego here in the Gita, by the time we get here, is an enemy. And the expansive self is the best friend. How did we get to the point where we can't tell the difference between the voice of an enemy and the voice of a friend? How did we get to that point? If you have an external enemy, I don't know, we can be fooled by them sometimes, right? And sometimes we don't listen to our best friends anymore. So I think the real key here is to find a way to listen to what's going on inside and really start noticing, is this the voice of an enemy or a true friend? And you can practice that by listening to people around you too. Do they have your best interest at heart? Are they holding on to something they should actually step aside for? That's tough. So we'll work with that today. But before we get there, I do want to say hello to Jane. Thank you for the wonderful morning here text, and I'll get back to you. Thanks to Kathy for watching. The practice is dedicated to Zack and Abie and their families. I hope everyone's well. And in a wonderful display of setting aside ego, if you'd like a concrete example with the Olympics, if you happen to see the podium ceremony with Biles, Chiles, and Andrede, that's a demonstration of setting aside ego. I mean, those 3 are amazing gymnasts, and they all 3 deserve to stand there and get their accolades. And 2 of them bowed down to the gold medal winner. It was uplifting. So if you're wondering for any action or maybe any thought, you can look at that as an example. Is it separate limited self standing there celebrating their limited self-achievement? Or is there a coming together that represents something more expansive that uplifts the world? Yeah, that's happening inside all of us right now. So as you do your practice today, we'll start with me being really tall in the balance pose, as always. We can think of doing the balance pose just for us, like to make us feel good about our practice, to make our limited selves feel better in some way, or how can we do it in a way that's not just for ourselves, but somehow honors everything. So today I'm doing it like this, which is very common, but with the intention of, as I'm here, I'm honoring the whole natural world that supports me, Mother Earth that holds me, the sky providing the air I breathe, the trees providing the air I breathe, flowers, beauty, but also food, basil, and then we'll have our contemplation. So let's give this a shot, shall we? So tall. Let's switch. Come on out. There's a mourning dove. I don't want to disturb. Oh, I disturbed. Maybe I didn't disturb it. Something disturbed it. So let's contemplate. Today I invite you to just listen to what's going on inside and notice if you can start telling what's the voice of the ego as enemy, the contracted self as enemy, or the expansive self as truly your best friend. 5 minutes. coming back. Well, thank you so much for being part of this, because together it's so much more than if I were just doing it alone. May you learn to find and listen to the voice of your very best friend. See how it goes when next we meet again. So until then,